Okay, so I will start. My name is Katy. I have actually I defend freedom of choice so that any person can learn the way he wants to learn and what's suitable for himself or herself. And so for me, it's not important whether it's in a school or not in a school. Anyone should be happy to learn. Learning should be a pleasure and not a duty or an imposition. So I come originally from France, and I've been living in Luxembourg for about 25 years, where I home educated my daughter at the beginning, just to be with her, because school is compulsory very early in Luxembourg at 3-4 years old. And then I created an association to meet with other homeschoolers, and I got a lot of requests of people really unhappy in schools who wanted to quit school and had a lot of struggle with administration and inspectors and authorities. So I looked at the law, and I learned a lot about human rights as a supreme law above the law. And I used this a lot to defend the freedom of choice of these young people. I also met Bertrand from Germany, because he has been doing a very interesting work in Germany defending also young people not willing to go to school despite a complete, absolute school attendance law. So it's very difficult. You are a criminal if you don't go to school in somehow. And I also met Derry during COVID, during lockdown, as we created the group Free. We have a newcomer. And Free stands for Full Human Rights Experience Education. I made once, hello, an announcement on the UDEC network to ask if some people were interested in human rights to defend freedom of education. And somehow Derry joined this discussion group, which we called Free. And this name acronym was invented by young people in South Africa, further to a Nairo conference, actually. Because there was some discussion, and they found out this acronym, and I really like it because it really says what human rights say. Education should lead to a liberation. Education should lead to freedom, and to realize freedom, justice, and peace. So I will shortly explain with a few slides the philosophy of human rights in education. And I will share some thoughts, some philosophical thoughts, how we can use them, how we can free ourselves to claim human rights, because if you don't claim them, they are worthless. And Bertrand and Derry will probably share their experience as well. So maybe, Bertrand, if you can shortly introduce yourself before I start, and then Derry, if you want.
Excuse me. Good morning, all of you, or hello. I am Bertrand, a free philosopher living in Germany and having a very poor English. Sorry for that. I'm dealing with questions of human dignity, and one of the very important questions, of course, is the question of people disliking to go to school and what happens. So I will tell more about it afterwards.
So Derry, if you want just to shortly introduce.
Yeah, I'm Derry Hannam. I'm pleased to say I know already some people in this group, which is nice. Yeah, my English is also not very good. Sorry, but at least it's my native tongue. So really, I'm here because I regard Bertrand and Katy as really important and significant thinkers. I think of myself as an activist, as a doer, a teacher. I've always worked with young children, I hope in a progressive and self-directed democratic way. But these people, Katy and Bertrand, they're thinkers. And so really, I don't see myself as in quite the same league. But what I'm perhaps useful here this morning is they think their English isn't very good. That's not my opinion, and it's much better than my German or my French. But if anybody is stuck and not quite sure what's just been said, maybe I could suggest that you unmute your mic, that you jump in, and if I can explain in a bit more experienced English, I'll do so. So I think that's my role this morning. It's a sort of emergency backup if what's been said hasn't been quite clear enough in English. How's that, Katy?
Thank you. So let's start.
Thank you, Derry. Thank you for your help.
Yeah. So next slides. There are about 20 slides. It should take about 15 minutes, but then we can talk. Okay, so this is a map of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in the world as of today. The dark blue country, it is where it is fully adopted in the law. The light blue, like Russia or Australia or I think Canada, it's not completely adopted. And the orange one, like USA or China, it is not adopted, ratified as an international treaty. But it's not so important because some rights of this treaty are somewhere else in the law sometimes, maybe not in China, but in the US, I suppose. And then I will explain the hierarchy of law because this is a very important concept to understand, to know how it works in your country. So I will just come back to this term universal because this declaration was made by people from different cultural, political, and geographical backgrounds. There were people from Lebanon, from China, from the US, from France, from many parts of the world with different culture and with different religions. So it's supposed to be valid for anyone in the world. It has a moral value, in fact. It is a moral ideology, and it quite suits my ideology, so I'm using it. But it doesn't mean it's a truth, it's just an ideology. It is established in many laws, so we can use it. So I take the next slides. So this is important because the hierarchy of law shows that fundamental rights are at the top of the pyramid. So they are established and they have power, and it's difficult to modify them. But at the bottom of the law, you have a lot of rules and legislation, and this can be changed very easily and quickly. That's why nowadays what we observe is that government and countries are ruling more and more by bottom laws, and they are neglecting fundamental rights which should be above them. So actually we should reverse the pyramid, and the fundamental values should be the base for the rest. And what we observe in practice, it's the contrary. We have a lot of law, like school laws, saying you have to go to school at this period of your life, you have to do this and that and learn this and that. And in fact, what these laws should be compliant with upper laws, but this is neglected, and this needs to be claimed, and more. And if not, then we have a shift towards totalitarianism. And I will remind of what Hannah Arendt was saying when she analyzed the Nazi time. So this is a quote I will share. So she says, thus the bureaucrat avoids, I cannot see actually, avoids any general law, facing each situation one by decree, because the fundamental stability of a law would threaten to establish a permanent community in which no one can be a god, since everyone must obey the law. And this is what's happening in France, you have a lot of decrees which are voted, and they are not compliant with above law. And then you don't have time to contest, because the time you contest, they are changed. So at the end, fundamental rights are completely ignored. And this is a real danger that can lead to authoritarianism and totalitarianism. So people need to fight and claim human rights. And if not, you have the risk that you have people like Nazi Adolf Eichmann just acting like a bureaucrat and just obeying the law, even if it doesn't make sense. And if it doesn't make sense within fundamental rights in general. So you have this kind of people in the school system. They just apply the law without thinking, is it the right thing or not the right thing for education? And what you have to find out when you are facing such people, you have to distinguish whether they are really deliberate evil, really wanted to dominate and have power, and then maybe there's nothing to do much about them. But if they are just bureaucrats, sometimes it's just enough to enter into a dialogue and to make them being reasonable again. And this is what we do. What we've done so far in Luxembourg to contest some decision from administration we did not agree with because they were not compliant with upper rights. And it really worked. We do it in a tactful way and without violence, just discussing. And what we did as well, sometimes it doesn't work. So then we have to claim the law. And so far we didn't need to go to court because we managed to find issues to our problems with reasonable people. And because most of the times they don't do it wanting to be mean, they just don't realize they are not compliant with the law. So you need to educate them to what the law really say. So eventually, people who really have power are the people. We have the power, and we should not forget that. But this means any citizen has the power, but some can abuse it, and then we need education to to actually instruct people, not instruct, but educate people to be able to make their own mind and to discern what is good and what is not good for themselves or for others. So human rights are actually safeguards to protect from fear and ignorance. So here you have a very naughty dictator, or like a person who took the power or who was granted power, and because people fear this person. And you have some people who look like nice people, but in fact they are manipulating you. So you need to be educated to realize you are manipulated, to raise awareness. So the more educated you are, the better you can claim your rights and defend yourself and claim what is right for you. So that's why after the war, this treaty was made. It's to protect people and to make sure they can be educated. So it led to a lot of discussion because this is all about who has the power and how we share power between a government or between people to ensure peace and justice. And so should it be the parents? Should it be the young people? Should it be the government? Who decides? So there were a lot of discussion which led to Protocol 2 in the European Convention on the Right to Education. And clearly what comes out when you read all case law and when you read the text is a kind of, it is about preserving the dignity of a person for everyone. So it's about the main purpose of education is it's freedom, justice, and peace, and nothing else, for everybody in the world, and to preserve dignity. And what is dignity? Bertrand will probably say a lot more about this, but so everyone coming to the world, wherever from, is has an equal right to dignity, and we are all born free and equal in dignity and rights. So this applies to everybody, whatever your age or anything. And dignity is nothing else that you define what is dignity, because it's about yourself. So it's about equity and giving the right thing in the right quantity, as you can see, to the right person at the right moment. And nobody can judge what is right except the person itself. So if you think school is violent, nobody should tell you it's not violent or it's not so violent. It's the person itself should be able to discern what is right or not right for himself. And this applies to anybody, whatever the age, whatever the color of skin, of sex, language, religion, political origin. It's for everybody. So in short, it means human rights are a misarchy. It means there should be no domination and power more than it is necessary to live together in freedom and peace. And that's where we always have to strive towards a balance, to balance power between individual and collectivity, to make sure this aim of education and the fundamental rights are realized. And this is why education, again, the only purpose of education is to promote the respect for these rights and the realization of freedoms for everybody and everywhere, in every organ of society. It is an ideology, but it is very strong and it can be claimed at any time by anyone. So you find the definition of, well, some article on education in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So everyone has the right to education. So it means it's not a question of age again. And this should lead to self-fulfilling yourself and to realize fundamental freedoms. And parents in that context, they have a prior right to choose, because to avoid that powerful governments abuse their power, because they have a lot of power. Because we can compare them to leviathans. Actually, people grant some power to governments to protect them, to organize the society. So you can have very powerful leviathan, and basically I put the image of this whale, which is a leviathan with a baby leviathan. It can be harmless and powerful. Then it can play some funny games and abuse you, or not be quite stable. And then it would be also a mythical creature in the history, in many tales. And this shows it is also what we think the government should be, that impacts on how they act. And maybe the first thing to consider and to reconsider is Article 4 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It says no one should be held in slavery or servitude. And in fact, people put themselves in servitude, and they should rediscover the power to say no to authority when it doesn't make sense. And maybe a very good book I could advise is The Politics of Obedience. It's free online on this link. And it explains how we follow a manipulator and lose our freedom just because we voluntarily put ourselves as servants of some authority that in fact has no authority. We just give it to them. So we should remind ourselves that we are born free, and it is an art to continue to be free and to claim this freedom. And maybe
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you put the title of the book in the chat, do you think?
Yeah, I will try. I will put in the chat after. Okay. And okay, I have to to get used to how to use this. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
yeah,
I don't.
I will do for sure. I will do in the maybe now. We should discuss how, in practice, we manage to do this. I explained a little bit that in Luxembourg we manage just talking and having sound discussion with people with authority, and it was quite effective. Maybe because they are quite democratic, and maybe the law is more helpful for us. But maybe Bertrand now can explain how he could put in practice in Germany using the same philosophy. So I will give the word to him, and Derry, feel free to add any experience you may have, or anyone here in this group, since we are not so many.
Well, my intention is first of all to explain a few things. So, and as my English is not so perfect as Derry's and yours, I have written a few details of my talk. We are claiming human rights, aren't we? So, and we have seen, Katy, thank you, that these rights are unconditional. So they are not bound to any condition, let's say freedom or dignity. And one thing is very important. The very sense of human rights is to protect the person from, or to defend his rights from the possibility that a state or who or whatsoever could attend these human rights. So the sense of human rights is to defend the person. And of course, this applies to young beings, or human beings who are generally told to be children. And for me, this word children or childhood or child is very important, because a child or children or childhood is bound to the idea of an object of state, an object of society, an object of parents, an object of schools. So they are minors. And as minors, they are fully delivered to, or even worse, they are victims of well-intended welfare. And this is a problem. But now we have got a new situation because some young humans dare to refuse that treatment. They refuse by words or by their way of life, for instance, by so-called illness. They refuse to be made happy by force and violence. And they claim their right to be respected as human beings. This goes further than just having got contribution in a so-called children parliament or other infantile playgrounds without any importance. For that right to be free of course include the right of saying a clear no. Freedom is not only the freedom from or the freedom for something. Freedom is at first the freedom of saying no, which includes the evidence this no has to be respected, this no has to be considered. This respect not only refers to other people, for instance, to the family, but should be in a democratic state and evidence for all kinds of authorities and, of course, for the justice. This is evident, but it is not the case in general. This is the problem. So let us put the case: a girl or a boy refuses to go to school for any reasons, it doesn't matter which one. Isn't it evident that this statement needs to be respected? this fact would actually change the conditions of growing up, which are the real needs of a free and self-educating person, of a group, of society, of life itself. All the leading signs on behalf of our life would be removed, which is the real sense of life. Furthermore, what a crazy idea to isolate young people in a reservation aside real life and social responsibility, a reservation called school, whatsoever this school looks like, whether it is a normal state school or a so-called new or reform school, or let's say homeschooling. No, everybody is a human being and keeps to be so also because of the very human desire or the very human need to experience education. Education? Well, yes, education in the English meaning of the word, not a pedagogical leading to any aim by any leader. This is what is generally understood with the word education in other languages than in English. But in the English sense of the word, the lifelong ability of being curious, creative, active. And this is something very different. This means to be alone and with others, getting, receiving, spending, or sharing the luck of culture, of knowledge, of techniques, of social abilities, and a lot more, always under the sign of freedom and dignity. As I very consciously avoid the problematic word learning, which for many people is bound to school, I'll call that ability self-directed education. So I beg your pardon, but I avoid the word learn, to learn or learning, because for a lot of people, this word is bound to school, and it refers to a bad remembrance of some things which people have experienced. One of the most important matters to that self-directed education, of course, is confidence. Confidence in oneself, in life, of course, in other people. Confidence stands out of what is typical for our system and what the system creates and sustains. Let's call it mistrust or distrust. Confidence on the other one part, or mistrust and distrust on the other part. This is what the system creates and sustains. In that sense, without any discrimination by age, or let's say better by youth, which means being a child, self-directed education becomes an ethical matter, an ethical position. This position might be in opposition to what I call the norms of normality, as self-directed education could be considered as a symbol of being free and respected in one's dignity. Of course, this position, this attitude, this evidence might be in opposition to the laws on behalf of schooling. Thus, the crucial question is, do we want our daughters or sons be manipulated with ideas rooting in past times which are obsolete, let's say, in the 19th century? Or do we want them to have their own life and create their own instruments of coping on a creative and active way with what life will spend them whenever this occurs? This is, I think, the challenge I'm talking about. Please imagine some people still nowadays discussing the necessity of having horse carriages for our traveling. Wouldn't you wonder? I hope a lot of people yet wonder with which discussions happen to be held still in the year 2021, to be held about schooling, whereas the crucial question should clearly be situated elsewhere. In the past months and years, with an engaged German lawyer, several cases brought by school authorities to court were successful in the sense it was possible at least to block the well-thinking but not well-doing authorities, and furthermore, even to get positive judgments. But of course, we still never got the High Court. The High Court, which should have the duty of claiming the abolition of obsolete laws, partly relicts of anti-democratic times and regimes. I'm speaking of Germany, and in Germany, the school laws are partly a relict of the National Socialism Law 1938. Schooling still seems to be a taboo, and no judge at present dares to change anything about it, even though they must recognize that the norms and laws are not in conformity with constitutional rights. Nevertheless, the change will come and occur, not only because of the bankruptcy of school system, but also because involved people claim very clearly their opposition to the subtle manipulation. Can we imagine a High Court denying what is settled down in national constitutions and in international conventions? That everybody is a subject and needs to be fully respected first and foremost by states which claim to be democratic. At the end, I just want to emphasize the ethical importance of the subject, which means away from all forms of discrimination, particularly of childhood, and away from the obsolete or idea and ideal of schooling, which stands opposite to the evidence of every subject's fundamental right to find her or his way of self-directed education. Thank you, and I'm glad if Derry takes the lead.
Well, I am of course familiar with your thinking, Bertrand, and so I won't have had any trouble in understanding what you were saying, and the fact that you had prepared your words carefully made it all the clearer. The debate I often have with you is around the notion of children's rights and your strong dislike of the idea of children's rights, and particularly the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which many of us look to, particularly articles such as Article 12, which protects, in theory, the right of children to express their views on issues. But then, of course, always there's the little caveat for children's rights, where it says, to the extent that they're capable of understanding the issues, or words like that. So I wonder if you could say a little about why you're so opposed to the notion of children's rights, even seen in the context, the wider context of human rights, because isn't it just a fact that the very young human being, one of the things that distinguishes us from other species is the dependence of the young human being, almost total dependence. And of course, this is why learning, another word you avoid, but by learning is, in my view, so important for human beings, because we're born almost totally incapable of looking after ourselves. For example, once I was a sheep farmer, sheep farmer, and when the small baby lamb is born, within 30 minutes, it can stand up and run away with its mother to hide from the fox. By the end of the first day, it can do almost all the things that an adult sheep can do. But human beings really are not like this. So we have this long period of dependency. And of course, I absolutely agree that we extend the period of dependency in a quite absurd way. I was thinking Alexander the Great had conquered half the known world by the time he was 15 or 16, and yet we keep kids in complete dependency for more years than that. So I understand that. But back to my question, why do you reject the whole idea of childhood and children's rights?
Thank you. You could imagine to have slaves and have a convention on slavery and on slaves' rights. So you would have a distinction. You would produce a distinction, or you would have a distinction produced and then carry it further on with a convention, which would mean please do not abuse slaves or whatsoever. So there is no need of any distinction. There is a distinction between a baby and, let's say, other human beings, but there is no need of having protecting laws, because every kind of protection means something against the natural law. Of course, if we respect the dignity and the freedom of everybody, we will of course protect. There is some kind of other quality, and I call it the love, just loving. And most mothers and fathers, but at least mothers, love their daughters and their sons, and so there is no way of creating new forms of distinctions, because this distinction leads to a reservation, and I'm against reservation. So if we had human beings being free, they could articulate, they could tell what they want, and they do so. They can really say or express their desire, their wishes. So and there is one more point. The idea and the ideal of childhood is a very new thing in civilization. It appears about the 15th century. It didn't occur in other. It doesn't appear in other cultures, and it did not appear in Western Europe before the Luther and the Protestantism. In the 15th century or 16th century. So there is no need of going further on with this idea of childhood, and there is no need for the state of keeping that. Well, of course, there is a need for the state, but there is for us no need to go on. If we say, I put a case. Imagine a 12 or 13-year-old girl or boy saying, I don't want to go to school. And the state and the justice answers, you are a child, you are a minor, you are an object, and you must do what states or whatsoever, what the authorities want you to do. And this wouldn't be possible if the subject was a full subject. This is the difference. So the difference is not in the looking at the person. Of course, you can say somebody is tall, somebody is big, somebody is thin, somebody is thick. All right, but this is not a matter for a difference. And this is why I reject the idea of childhood. And in rejecting this, I reject the idea of a children convention, which just, how to say, settles down this false idea, which is an idea of the 19th century. Now, another very short other point. I just said I reject the word learning because for most people, this word is bound to school. I'm in German, I have a lot of words, about 20 words, describing what is meant by learning, but not in the schooling sense of the word. So for making a difference, I just say, I don't use this word, I leave it to the school system, and I try to find other words for describing what happens.
Okay, that's clear.
Thank you.
Incidentally, what is in German, what is the word you use for learning not to be confused with school learning?
Well, for instance, in German, entdecken, erkunden,
okay.
Erfahren, a lot of words, which are all self-referented with the idea of self.
Yes. So you're saying really that children's rights, the idea of children's rights, are used to deny young human beings their full human rights.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yes. And I can follow this. I remember having a big argument with a senior education academic talking about the curriculum and the entitlement of young people to a full, broad and balanced curriculum. So I said to him, what you're actually saying then is that it's in the interests of the child, even though they don't think it is, to be forced to go to endless mathematics lessons where they believe, and correctly so, that they're learning nothing. And he said, yes, it's their right to be forced to go to mathematics lessons. And that's where I can see exactly the abuse of rights that is kind of enshrined within the notion of children's rights.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I can't quite bring myself to give up the idea of children's rights, because there are times when they can be used to challenge the authoritarian practices of states and schools, though I have to say, not very successfully in the English courts. I don't know of any case in an English court where a parent or a child has successfully used the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child to challenge compulsory schooling. But of course, in England, the state has an escape route. It can say, well, if that's how you feel, you can home educate. But by goodness, we're going to come and check up on the way you do it to make sure it's as much like school as possible. Anyway, I'm talking too much. Thank you, Katy and Bertrand. These are such important subjects. And I feel us practitioners, we don't stop to think enough, or at least I would say that of myself. We're too busy trying to bring about the changes that we feel are necessary without giving sufficient thought, perhaps, to why they're necessary philosophically. Anyway, I'm talking too much. Can we throw it open to the participants here? And can anyone chip in? Are you convinced by Bertrand's argument against the notion of childhood? Or do you share my slight anxiety that we throw the baby out with the bathwater?
Sorry. I just wanted to add, we also use sometimes children's rights, but we never split it from human rights. So like we could claim participation, but not only be heard, but also be acknowledged as having a real voice and choice. So we never split both, because otherwise it can be abusive and it's dangerous.
Bruno, your microphone is off. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to say thank you so much. I really need to see this recording several times later on to digest everything. So I really appreciate. And I just wanted to ask you, and maybe this is, I don't know, silly or self-evident question, right? But how could we go with the situation of people using same wordings to mean so different things? So for example, and I have seen that many times, that in the context, for example, of UNESCO, SDGs, and all of this, they use certain wording like human flourishing or many things that we might be using, but it means something totally different because they place that on a conventional schooling setting. So they talk about well-being, but they still place it in the context of a conventional school, which is by definition doing the opposite, right? So how do you think could we go through that? Do we need to regain the use of those words to change the meaning? Should we come up with new terms? Should we, or is it a matter of convincing people that what they are saying, it's not right, but are we right? Yeah, how do you think could we move forward?
This is like, this is very Orwellian. We've been through an era where the language has been compressed very much, like it was in the book 1984. I think of how the word democracy has been misused to justify United States military invasions all over the world. They're imposing democracy. And in the same way, one of the things that makes conversations about schooling difficult here in Canada and the US is that the word learning, which is the general, the powerful, simple English term for what children and people do all our lives, has over the last 2 decades, I think maybe just the last decade, become equated with schooling. And I think that is deliberate. They don't call it online teaching. They don't call it when they're talking about what they're doing now during COVID, they're talking about learning. And I think they have done that quite deliberately to make it difficult to talk about other kinds of education. But I think learning is a pretty powerful basic word that we're being robbed of. And we need to reclaim it, because every time, as you point out, Bruno, every time we have a term, it does get co-opted. So I don't think it serves us to give up our simple, powerful words.
And of course, I think the word rights has had a similar process applied to it. You know, thinking about my example, challenging the academic, that what sense does it make to say that a child has the right to be compelled to go to mathematics lessons? What sort of a right is it that enables other people to compel you to do anything? And that's, of course, where the word freedom becomes so important, I guess, Katy. And the title of free is symbolically very important.
Mm-hmm. Well, to revert to your comments, I think we need to inform a lot and talk to people. And what we do here, we rather ask questions, because we don't want to establish any kind of truth, but then the people we are challenging, we ask questions where they are trapped because they cannot answer according to the law, and then they are trapped, and then it's not a fight. It's just we claim something. We are not infringing the law. They are infringing the law, and this changes a lot of things, because they have nothing to reproach us. We are not attacking anyone. We are just claiming what is in the law. And like if they would say you have to learn to read at this age, and then we ask, so why is this, and why now, and what if it could be different, and why are you scared? Because most of the times people have fears. So it's more about reassuring people towards their own fear. And then when they realize it's not so, there's no reason to be fearful, it helps. And to do this, we need to be very well informed ourselves and have a lot of information and experiments, like any empirical data about places with self-directed education, and good stories, lots of anecdotes, and just to say, don't worry, everything will be fine. And then they relax, and it helps. So it's more about making people feel not scared. It's about fear a lot. That's what I would say. But it's a lot of work to be very well informed, take the time to talk to people, to find the right way to talk to them, and to adapt each time. It's tactful. It's a strategy as well. And also in case law, there are so many good stories you can use, but you need to know them and to look in details and to find information. It's a lot of work. That's why I created the work free, to collect all the experience and good stories to help defend this right, and not convince people, but at least show them they are wrong. And if they think they are right, they should prove it to us and not the contrary. And this changed a lot of things.
Let me please put two examples. The first one refers to United Kingdom, to the 19th century. The 19th century, it has been shown that the introduction of school had a very depressive consequence. In the 19th century, there were the soldiers, the new young soldiers, were proved if they are able to read or not after having been in school. And the consequence of this how do they to look at it is that after introduction of school in United Kingdom, there were more illiterate people than before. Another example about the 21st century in Germany. The official statistics say that in Germany we have at least 7.5 million of illiterate people after 10 years of schooling. 7.5 million of illiterate people, there are 14% of German adult population. 14% of people cannot read a text and understand what they are reading, and not even writing. This is an official statistic. So this means schooling is not the solution of the problem of culture, not at all. So what does it mean for me? Well, as Bruno told, we can have a discussion about words, and I love discussions about languages, but the question of self-education, self-directed education, is an ethical question and not a question of words. And out from this ethical position, this changes all I would say, changes the play, the conditions of the play, because as Katy told, we are not we haven't got to bring the proof. The system has got to bring the proof that its system works, and it is not able to prove it on the opposite. So we are just defending something which is obvious. And a last point, sorry to come back to what Derry said before. For me, the opposite of childhood is adult. And when people leave the so-called state of childhood, they feel to be an adult. And this opposition is silly. It's crazy. There is no opposition. If we create the idea of childhood, we could be children up to the last minute, the last second of our life. So then I would agree with the idea of childhood. If we are all children, because we are all day and all life long, we are discovering, we are experiencing things which are important in life. And on the opposite of it, by people who have been in school and who have been treated as children, when they are delivered from this negative slavery state, they feel as an adult, they feel free, but they are not. They have been manipulated. And this is something which had to do with which deals with psychology, which is called, I don't know in English, in German we call it the identification with the aggressor. I don't know whether you know this word. So
it works perfectly in English.
All right, thank you. So this means people feel, now I'm not a child, I am the aggressor. And they behave on that way. This is terrible. So sorry to come back and say what I'm speaking of, self-directed education, is a question of ethical attitude. And this is far behind the sole discussion on words.
There's a psychological expression, I think, Bertrand, for your meaning, called the return of the oppressed.
Yeah.
Where the person behaves as they have been treated themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. Bruno, your micro.
Yeah, sorry. No, my question about wording was more regarding on how can we talk with these people if we are speaking a different language. That was a bit my concern, right? Like, how can we engage in discussions to, I don't know if to say foster change or make them understand if we are speaking a different language? Because if we start discussing and you are in German and I'm in Spanish, we can have the best ideas in the world, that because of not speaking the same language, we are not going to get anywhere. So how can we get to a place where we can, I don't know if to say confront or create?
Bruno, I think one of the things we have to do is there's an English expression, to hoist someone on their own petard. I don't know if you've come across this expression, Bertrand, Katy, but what it means is you take what somebody said and you apply it to their behavior. And a good example of this would be the mission statements that schools produce. Schools produce mission statements. For example, in this school, you learn to be a democratic citizen, even though you don't make any democratic decisions, whatever, and you're told what to do from the age of 2 till the age of 20. Nonetheless, apparently, this is educating you to be a democratic citizen. It's absurd. Another one, we are preparing young people for the workplace, and then we ring bells and make them go from room to room every half hour and do some of this and some of that, make them dress up in special uniforms and line up in special ways. And I don't know of any workplaces that treat people like that. So there's another example. And you can take almost every claim of school mission statements and show that in reality, they're not being applied. The biggest one of all would be, we help every young person in our school fulfill their human potential. Well, that's interesting. Almost every school claims this in England. But if you ask them, how do they know what the potential is of the young humans in their institution? They haven't got the first idea, because they don't bother to listen to them to find out. So I think we should, in a sense, turn the language back on themselves.
Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to do when I said to the famous academic, so you think that children have the right to be compelled to go to mathematics lessons even when they're learning nothing? Now, even he could see the absurdity of that. So I think we have to sort of demonstrate the absurdity of their claims and the untruths of their claims. That's me chipping in as the contributor to this session. I'll now switch back to being translator.
Yeah, I agree with that. Actually, it is quite helpful to act at the bottom of the pyramid and to gain more and more people to realize how wrong they are, what the absurdity of things. And it's, I think with internet, more and more people are aware of this. They are maybe not so much aware of adult domination. I can see in many discussions, especially in France now with the attack on homeschooling. So, but when you discuss with people, they realize their posture. And the more people are aware of what they think and how they act is not really compatible, and they think they are protecting or they are respecting young people, but in fact they are not. When they realize they have been not respecting themselves and they are the victim of their own education, it's a long way for each person. It takes time, but the more you talk and you exchange, it works. And what we do also, we recently wrote a letter to the Commissioner of Human Rights, which we shared on Airo, and I can put the link here as well. We denounced everything that is wrong and we ask questions. So this is the kind of approach we have, and we should do the same political work with the United Nations and all big institutions, because if you observe the work done by LGBT movements, for instance, they have done this work at international institutions. And now when they go to court, they have a lot of treaties and texts to support their claim. And the more texts we have to say, okay, like the Council of Europe made a documentation against violence in schools, the more reference we have, the easier it is to claim something in court, and towards also lower level of people who are just what I call bureaucrats. So this is all small action is important and makes sense. And you have to find the one which is the right one for you at a specific moment. And I saw also a comment about illiteracy research. I did a very big work on this because it's a topic I'm really interested in, because words are very powerful to defend freedom. And if you can write well, if you can read well, you can really think much better. So it's a true disaster that people don't learn to read at school. And right now in France, they have a new guide to learn to read. And some teachers are denouncing how manipulative it is and how wrong it is, because they use science to say you should learn to read like this, but it is a big manipulation. And I'm glad some teachers realize that and now attack schools, because they have less and less freedom and they know it's not right what they are what they are now ordered to do. So there are more and more people being aware, because with internet we can exchange a lot of information. So we have to find the right words to raise awareness, and it should be simple. And this is a big work, but I think the more you think and you read, the better you find the right words to convince people or to make them change their mind or grow themselves in their thoughts.
Katy, I just thought of something relating to the word learning in English that totally supports Bertrand's position. Somebody was telling me yesterday about their 5-year-old child who's been in what we call reception here with our early years foundation program, which I have to say still has a lot of play left in it. And then he's moved to class 1 in the school. And the 5-year-old describes it in this way. He said, when I was in reception class, we played all the time. Now I'm in class 1, we're doing learning and I hate it.
Yeah.
Just one idea or one remark. We must acknowledge that the system is in a bankruptcy system. The system cannot afford anymore to pay for what it has, for what it says to be, for the welfare it is promising. So the bankruptcy of the system is not only the bankruptcy of state school, it is also the fact that school needs a lot of side cost, let's say the private lessons you need, or perhaps say how is it in English, HDRS,
TDAH, hyperactivity.
Yes, and so-called illnesses which are bound to school and which need a lot of medicine and a lot of costs. And this system we cannot afford anymore this silly system which is fully counterproductive.
Yes. Well, and on learning again and hoisting schools on their own petard, another thing I found as an inspector, schools claim to be preparing young people for lifelong learning.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt that learning more than ever needs to be lifelong. We're going to have to relearn and relearn and relearn all the time, like me trying to understand this bloody Zoom system. It's awful. You have to go on it. And schools claim to be preparing young people for lifelong learning. But when I spoke to thousands of young people as an inspector, what's your feeling about learning after you've left school? They would say, that's it. I've had enough of it. I don't want to do any more for the rest of my life.
Exactly.
So we've got something very wrong here.
Zoe has a question. Zoe? Yeah.
Katy, I think you probably need to wind us up, don't you? You've got a couple of minutes left. I'm only urging you along because the next workshop is mine and I've no idea how to get into it.
Okay, but we listen to Zoe because she has, or Valerie, I don't know.
Oh yes, please. Yeah, Zoe. She's been writing a lot of interesting things in the chat.
So I'm trying to figure out on a practical level how to unravel all the twisted distortions, both in the area of education and what it is and how it can be reformed, and in the area of human rights and children's rights and how that can be untangled and reformed, and the relationship between the two. And what I'm finding is that the fact that education is being used as a tool to safeguard children's human rights. So compulsory education is supposed to be supporting children's human rights, distorts both education and human rights. So I'm wondering what you think about whether applying pressure or making appeals or claiming whatever way we can use the what's it called, the conventions in on themselves to separate education from the protection of human rights. Maybe it's a solution.
I think you need to clarify what education means in human rights. That's what I try to do with the slides, to remind of the purpose of education in human rights. And it is freedom, justice, and peace. But then you have the question that arises very often is that people think young people are not competent to decide for themselves. And then you need a lot of discussion, because this is still in our society a big problem, that we think they are not competent, but we don't leave them any space to prove they are competent, because we dictate to them what they have to do. So when you look at unschoolers who grow up quite freely and being respected, there are a lot of evidence that they can decide a lot of things for themselves. And when you look at parental authorities in the laws, in most laws, it says nothing else than that parents are here to protect and to enable young people to make their own choice. So if they are not able to make their own choice because they are too young to discern things, they have not enough experience, then our duty is just to help them becoming capable of making the right choice for themselves. And if you look at adults, they are not even able to make the right choice for themselves. So this needs to be discussed and put forward. And also, what I wanted to say, I will give an example, because it's kind of difficult example, but if imagine you have a child who is born and has no clear sex characteristics, so is neither a male nor a female nor a woman. So this is a norm, and there are now court cases of young people who have been operated when they were 4 years old, because the parents said, "Oh, we will operate our baby so he can be a woman or a man and have his status in this society." So in fact, they decide, instead of the young person, they don't wait that the young person is old enough to decide for itself whether he wants to be rather a male or a female or none of them. And this is illegal. And we could apply this to the school norm as well. We could say, we don't decide for you whether you go to school or not. You are too young to decide, but when you are old enough, we can support your choice of going or not going. And there are also court cases at the European Convention, European Court of Justice, saying that the young people are very vulnerable to authority and to domination, and especially at school. So we need to find all these small court cases and arguments to defend that education should not be imposed, but should lead only to decide for oneself what is right for oneself. And this is, again, human rights. And if you think with the concept and the ideology of human rights in all your debates and argumentation, it becomes really logical to me.
I think we're several minutes over time, and this room is going to be used again by another workshop in a few moments. So I think probably we've got to stop.
Yeah.
But I think this discussion was quality rather than quantity. We weren't a large group, but by goodness, the issues were really important. And I think the quality of the discussions reflected in the comments of the chat. So lovely to see you again, Bertrand. Katy, fantastic. I hope we meet again soon.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
And I think you're the only one who can shut us down, Katy. So maybe you could try and do it.
Thank you to all of you.
Yes.
Thank you. So we have to
Bye.
quit.
Thank you
So
so
bye-bye.
much.
Thanks.